Looks like we're here. I think we're ready to go. Nice to see you all. All right, let's set our motivation. We'll do three principal aspects of the path again, just to keep it fresh in our minds. And if you don't mind to put your video on, that makes it more engaging. So just taking a minute, getting yourself into the headspace for class. Homage to the precious noble masters. The very essence of all the Buddhist teachings, the path that is praised by the noble bodhisattvas, and the entrance for all fortunate ones desiring liberation. To the best of my ability, I shall now set forth. You who are unattached to samsara's pleasures, and strive to make full use of the freedoms and advantages. You who follow the path delighting all the Buddhas, fortunate ones, listen well with a clear and open mind. Whilst lacking pure renunciation, there is no way to pacify the continual thirst for pleasure in the ocean of samsara. And since all living beings are bound by their craving for existence, you must begin by finding the determination to be free. The freedoms and advantages are rare, and there's no time to waste. Reflect on this again and yet again, and dispel attachment to this life. To dispel attachment to your future lives, contemplate repeatedly the unfailing effects of karma and the sufferings of samsara. When, through growing accustomed to thinking in this way, hope for the pleasures of samsara no longer arises even for an instant, and throughout both day and night you long for liberation, then at that time true renunciation has been born. Yet if this renunciation is not embraced by the pure motivation of bodhicitta, it will not become a cause for the perfect bliss of unsurpassed awakening. So the wise should generate the supreme bodhicitta. Beings are swept along by the powerful current of the four rivers, tightly bound by the chains of their karma so difficult to undo, ensnared within the iron trap of their self-grasping, and enshrouded in the thick darkness of ignorance. Again and yet again they are reborn in limitless samsara, and constantly tormented by the three forms of suffering. This is the current condition of all your mothers from previous lives. Contemplate their plight and generate supreme bodhicitta. If you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be incapable of cutting through conditioned existence at its root. Exert yourself, therefore, in the methods for realizing interdependence. The one who sees the cause and effect operate infallibly for the phenomena of samsara and nirvana, and for whom any object of conceptual focus has subsided, has set out upon the path delighting all the Buddhas. The knowledge that appearances arise unfailingly in dependence, and the knowledge they are empty are beyond all assertions. As long as these two appear to you as separate, there can be no realization of the Buddha's wisdom. Yet when they arise at once, not each in turn, but both together, then through merely seeing unfailing dependent origination, certainty is born, and all modes of misapprehension fall apart. That is when discernment of the view has reached perfection. And you know that appearances dispel the extreme of existence, while the extreme of nothingness is eliminated by emptiness. And then you will also come to know how emptiness arises as cause and effect. Then you will be immune to any view entailing clinging to extremes. When in this way you have correctly understood the key points of the three principal aspects of the path, withdraw to solitude, dear son, strengthen your diligence, and swiftly accomplish the ultimate and lasting aim. Sangye churam zogi chunam lai janchu badu dani kapsu chi dagi chunyan ki pe sonam ki drola penchya sangye drupa sho sangye churam zogi chunam la janchu badu dani kapsu chi dagi chunyan ki pe sonam ki Drola benchya sangye drupa sho sangye churam sogi chunam la janchu padu dani kapsu chi dagi chunyan ki pe sonam ki drola benchya sangye drupa sho. Letting that motivation connect revive. Okay. So tonight we're going to look at wisdom. And wisdom is one of the topics that is universal to all forms of Buddhism, but is also very specific and particular depending which form of Buddhism you're looking at. So all Buddhists agree you need wisdom to cut suffering. We all agree you need wisdom to cut suffering, but what that wisdom is and how that suffering comes about and all of that, there's a lot of discussion. And so if you really want to do a deep dive into wisdom, the subject of tenets becomes really interesting and intriguing. So, philosophical tenets goes into the different ways of viewing reality, the different levels of subtlety in addressing the view. And it's just kind of good to know that that subject exists. Because when you hear wisdom discussed in different Buddhist centers, there might be some variation and you'd wonder why. And a lot of this was due to the fact that the Buddha was really teaching to the audience in front of him. So for some people, telling the complete story all the way to the end would have been overwhelming and would have made them reject Buddhism altogether or go into nihilism or go into eternalism or leave behind ethics or develop some wrong view. There was a lot of consequences of feeding too much too fast to certain groups of people. And there were other groups of people who only needed a couple of words to really get it and really start to cut the cycle of suffering with just a few brief phrases and just something as simple as the Heart Sutra, as simple as the Heart Sutra, right? So when we talk about wisdom, it's just good to know that there are different ways of approaching it based on the different philosophical tenet schools. There are kind of two main philosophical tenet schools held by the Pali tradition and two main philosophical tenet schools held by the Sanskrit tradition. Tonight, I'll be speaking from the middle way consequence school view. So those of you that are Gelugpa or been hanging around FPMT centers for a while, it will be the normal way. You're used to hearing it and you won't be surprised at the things I will say. Okay, so it will be the normal Gelug Prasangika view. But just with that proviso that there are other ways of viewing the same content. And it's kind of viewed as a ladder that when you get to the subtlest form of whatever tenet school you're in, then the next level of subtlety will be kind of be available to you and you'll be ready for the next step and the next step. So tenets, very interesting. A little bit hair splitting, a little bit mental gymnastics, but ultimately a very useful subject. So that's my advertisement for tenets. Okay, so we're just going to do one of them, which is middle way consequence school view. And the idea of this type of wisdom, it all boils down to what is called the king of reasons. So wisdom is describing reality. What is reality ultimately? Ultimately, everything is empty of inherent existence. The king of reasons says that everything is empty of inherent existence because it dependently arises. So dependent arising is the reason why things are empty. What things are empty of is a particular characteristic of inherence. And to say that might not have a lot of meaning until you realize that everything you think, everything you see, all of your opinions have been filtered through this innate ignorance that believes the appearance of inherent existence. So everything appears to us as existing from its own side in and of itself, when the opposite is the case. It actually dependently arises on countless causes and conditions, parts, etc. Okay, so the ignorance that we're trying to cut through is the very ignorance that leads us to have self-grasping, self-cherishing, escalated all day, every day. And if we had this wisdom, we would just cut through the nonsense. The spell would be broken. Things wouldn't hook us in the same way. And so this wisdom is something that even on an intellectual level, even being curious about is said to be so powerful that it starts to leave samsara in tatters, to roughly quote Aryadeva from his 400 stanzas. even having correct doubt about reality, starts to interrupt these problematic cycles. So it's an essential topic. We're doing it from the Mahayana perspective, which means that our reason for ending suffering is not just to end suffering, but to end suffering for ourselves in such a way that we're also able to facilitate other people ending suffering, right? So it's with the altruistic attitude built in. So we move towards what's called ultimate bodhicitta. Relative bodhicitta is the bodhicitta we've been talking about. Yeah, the Mahayana motivation to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's the main Mahayana motivation, to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. To make that ultimate bodhicitta, it's in the mind of someone who has realized emptiness directly. So what makes ultimate bodhicitta is that reality has been directly, perceptually understood. Okay, so here's where we're up to. We've been doing renunciation, we've been doing bodhicitta, and now we're moving into correct view or wisdom, depending on how you want to frame it. The wisdom or correct view is of reality. And the correct view of reality, or the wisdom that realizes reality, is that reality, phenomena, everything is empty of inherent existence. So we're moving to this ultimate bodhicitta, which relies on the perfection of wisdom, is needed to cut the root of samsara. First, you do it conceptually. So through the accumulation of wisdom, then it becomes perceptual. So this is really empowering to realize that the thoughts you're having in your mind right now, the very inner debates, the very kind of inner turmoil, maybe, are the very things that build these accumulations of wisdom that gradually lead you to a perceptual realization. So we have to start where we are. We have to start where we are, which is just thinking about it, but that very thinking about it is starting to move us in the right direction. So when this path of Mahayana path of seeing begins, the first moment that your union of calm abiding, so single-pointed concentration, and special insight, analytical meditation, are focused perceptually on emptiness. Prior to that, you were doing the same combination, but focused conceptually. So how do we figure out if we've got it or not? Does it come up spontaneously and effortlessly? Yeah, is it's the same way we understand, a realization of bodhicitta or a realization of renunciation. It's not a realization or a pathway awareness until it spontaneously and effortlessly arises, unfabricated. But you need to fabricate it in order for it to become unfabricated, right? You need to practice it, do it on purpose intentionally before it comes up spontaneously. It really is the practice makes perfect. So don't get too intimidated, even though it may take us a while to get this particular realization. It really is refining and practicing the correct view again and again is what leads to it dropping into an actual pathway awareness. It's practicing it again and again. So I thought to reference the Heart Sutra a little bit tonight because it really explains how we do this. So most of you know the Heart Sutra, and but just in case to refresh our awareness, this is the main perfection of wisdom sutra that we rely on to point us to the view. So it goes, thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? So this first part is just setting the scene of the very senior teacher, the Bhagawan, meaning the Buddha himself, Arya Avalokiteshvara, or Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, in the aspect of a bodhisattva, and then the senior student Shariputra asking a question. So there are three main figures in the story. Two of them are in conversation, one of them is in meditation, right? The Buddha's in meditation, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra are talking. And right off the bat, this should show us that the Buddha's saying, I don't have the copyright on this wisdom. That Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra are moving towards this same exact wisdom that the Buddha is already abiding in. And the way in which to do that is done in analysis. And so Shariputra is asking, how do I do this? And so he said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, said this to the Venerable Sharivattiputra. Any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So this is the sentence that teaches us how to meditate on emptiness. Correctly, that means you need to analyze and refine and get more and more specific. And then repeatedly, in analysis, in meditation, in all sorts of ways, again and again, look at how your five aggregates are empty of inherent nature. How do you do that? You start with the body, form. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling. You could just go back and go, oh, feeling is empty. Emptiness is feeling. Emptiness is not other than feeling. Feeling is also not other than emptiness. Oh, discrimination. Discrimination is empty. Emptiness is discrimination, etc. And so what you're doing is you're looking at the different aspects of your experience that you identify with and really being with the fact that they lack inherent existence because they dependently arise. So you start with the body, the form, right? This is the form aggregate. And when you are adolescent or when you are complimented or when you are denigrated, the body feels like you, right? And when you're really relaxed and feeling really cruisy and you've been like eating properly and everything's digesting well and you're sort of feeling okay in your body, maybe that sense of the body being the self is a little bit softer. Yeah, have you had that experience, right? Like some days it's like, this is me. And some days it's like, oh, it's where I live or it's my vehicle or whatever. We have a differing relationship to our body day to day. But you know what it is to over-identify with the body? Yeah, do you remember being, I don't know, 14? That was the worst of it. I don't know, 25, depends. Um, but if you can even think of in this moment, if someone were to say, oh my goodness, you got so old. Or, oh my goodness, you're still so young. Immediately there's like an annoyance, even if you don't agree. Yeah, why is that? Or if someone says, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh my goodness, you're so beautiful. Even if you don't think you are, it brings up some like either yay or cringe. Yeah. Or if someone says to you, oh my God, look at your nose. Oh my God. Even if you think your nose is fine, right? So we might feel like we don't identify with the body, but constantly we're being bombarded with what is the right kind of body as a way to get us to buy stuff, right? And so so it's understandable that that's a place where we over-identify. If we can kind of sit with the way in which that is true first, then we can move on to the way it is not true. So the delicate thing with all these points of analysis is that we're a little bit too smart for our own good. Very quickly, you can think, yeah, the body dependently arises. This body is not me. It's composed of material from my mother and from my father and from food and from time and from this and from that. And really nothing about me is my own in a way. It's just the five elements, just like everything else. Sure, no worries. If you jump to that too quickly, then you actually miss the wisdom. So what this is what is called finding the object of negation. You need to find the problem before you can negate the problem. So there's the object of negation on many levels of subtlety, but one way of doing it is to look at each of the five aggregates and see the way that for a moment they can feel like the boss or the self or the me. Yeah, that they are the puppeteer and the rest of your bits and pieces are the puppet. So start with the body. Form is empty, emptiness is form. What does that mean? Okay, well, just think about your relationship to your body and just think about whether you like your body or you don't like your body, whether you wish it were more this or less that, whatever the case may be. Just have that feeling of what it is for it to be criticized or praised, such that you feel elevated or cringy. That's what you're looking for. Yeah. That elevated or cringy feeling. That's a coarse aspect of finding the object of negation. And then what you do is a little bit like a cop show. Okay. So the cop show analysis, it's not a technical term. The cop show analysis, the technical term would be the diamond slivers analysis of one and many, but I call it the cop show analysis because you're basically deciding the object of negation is the perp, right? They're the perp, they're the troublemaker, right? And now you're going to ask them, where were you on the night that you caused all that trouble? And you're going to good cop and bad cop it, right? With your analysis. So if you go in with bad cop too soon, the perp will be like, I wasn't causing any trouble, officer. I wasn't even there. I don't think the body is the self. No, surely not. That's very superficial and coarse. I let go of that way in my adolescence. So if you go in with bad cop too hard, too fast, the illusion will kind of fade. So you have to start with good cop and go, okay, okay. So say you do exist the way you seem. What is your relationship to your parts, the other aggregates? What is your relationship to your parts? So form, what is your relationship to discrimination, to feeling, to compositional factors, and to consciousness? Yeah, I'm not saying that you're not the boss. You might be the boss. I'm just asking. I'm just asking. So you're either one with the parts or you're separate from the parts, which either means you're one thing or you're many thing. You self, yeah, that thinks that the body is you. And very quickly you feel like, well, obviously the mind is not the body, or the feeling is not always related to a physical experience. Feeling can be mental or physical. Oh, interesting. And you starting playing around with your experience of the other aggregates, and you start to wonder, is the body really the self? Can you feel how that might be done? Right? You start to just play with the different elements of your experience, and you start to very organically release over identification with body. And then you can go in with bad cop and say, see, I told you. Yeah, you were the troublemaker, right? And then form fades as feeling like the prominent me, the prominent self, the one that's independent. Then you switch. Do it with discrimination. Do it with feeling. Do it with consciousness if you're feeling really brave. Because if you can really do this with consciousness and see how consciousness is not the inherent self, because there is no inherent self, then you're getting really subtle. So there is a self. It's just not the one we think we are. Okay? The one we think we are feels independent. It feels intrinsic. It feels inherent. It feels self-creating and self-perpetuating. It feels that way. There's a seeming of that. And then there's a seeming that everything else is like that too. That if I see this cup and find it beautiful, it is beautiful in and of itself. And that it's a cup in and of itself. And these are all things that I've chosen to learn about it and ascribe to it based on all sorts of causes and conditions. Someone else might be like, I hate sunflowers, it's a dumb cup, right? And it would be equally true for them. The cupness, however, gets closer to worldly convention because we may all agree it's something you can hold liquid in. Okay, so when we're starting to do this peeling and peeling and peeling, don't peel so far that you lose valid cognition, analyzing relative. Okay, so there's a difference between negating whether it's a beautiful cup or an ugly cup, and negating it being a cup altogether. Yeah. So there is a cup here, even if we use a different word for it, even if other languages call it something else, there's a general agreement in the world that a thing like this holds liquid. Yeah. So the name itself is not the issue, it's the convention that we're speaking about. So convention is the basis upon which we label the thing. Yeah, worldly convention. So if you start to lose worldly convention, you've gone too far and you're at risk of losing ethics. Okay? So the self that does exist is the self that is merely labeled by the mind on the valid basis of the aggregates. What seems to be the case is that there's an extra self there from the side of the aggregates that's bossing the aggregates around, right? Or is merged with each one. And the absurd consequence of that is that either the self is one independent thing, but then how on earth does it ever change? Or that it's many things and we all have multiple personalities and an aggregate could just kind of go rogue, right? So there's absurd consequences in thinking that the self is one with the aggregates or separate from the aggregates. There's absurd consequences to that. And so when you land on those absurd consequences, the object of negation dissolves and you're closer to realizing the emptiness of the self. You're closer then to cutting the root of samsara. You're closer then to actually moving closer to Buddhahood. Yeah. So form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. The easy way to understand a phrase like this is to take some sort of imagery that we already have a relationship with. Thich Nhat Hanh would say, use water and a wave. Yeah, the water is wave and wave is water. Right? Form is empty, emptiness is form. Just like a wave is made of water and a water is made of waves. Yes? So you can sort of point to the shape of a wave and say, I'm going to call that wave, Samuel, right? You can call that wave something and say, yeah, there's a shape there, there's a color there, there's characteristics I can point to. But the closer you get to the wave, the more you see it's made of molecules and bits and parts and all sorts of droplets and all sorts of debris and all sorts of things. And that is true of everything, that everything is labeled on the basis of parts. And to call this the, like Yönten system, right? From a distance is very easy, but the closer you zoom in, the more that concreteness goes. Yeah, which doesn't mean it dissolves into nothing. It just definitely dissolves that feeling of like independent, autonomous, self-created thing. Yeah. So the Heart Sutra is a very useful technique for starting to meditate on emptiness if you really stick with that main line that I highlighted, which is correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So the five aggregates are then listed right below: form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness. And you see the way that they're empty by looking at their dependent arising. Okay, so then you can look at all sorts of things. You can look at eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, no mind, but it's saying no, and it doesn't mean no altogether. It means no inherent nose, no inherent this, no inherent that. Okay, so when you see, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death, it means not inherently, not by itself. So all of this could be summarized as saying nothing stands alone, right? Everything is interdependent, nothing stands alone, but don't leave it at that. Just kind of use that as somewhere to kind of get your thinking comfortable and then start going a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So dependent arising is your access point to understanding why things are empty. You need to understand why things are empty so that you stop believing the lie of the projections of ignorance. If you can do that, you're not going to hurt yourself and others. You're not going to suffer. You're going to start actually purifying the seeds of previous bad karma in a much more efficient way. And eventually you'll actually cut samsara altogether. So it's fundamental to try and really examine, how does this self appear as opposed to how does it actually exist? How does that self appear as opposed to how it actually exists? And that one, and that one, and that one. And so whenever you're feeling a very strong, concrete opinion, to say, ah, merely labeled by the mind on the valid basis, or to say, not in and of itself, not from its own side, not by way of its own characteristics, is it this thing? Is it making some sense? So the object of negation is the one that feels like it's an inherent I. And that one doesn't exist at all. Yeah, there is a self, but it's not that one. But that one is where we have placed our identity. So our identity really lives very concretely anywhere we have been hated or celebrated. Yeah. Or ignored. Hated, celebrated, or ignored feels very us, but other parts don't particularly feel like us, even though they have just as much relevance as any other parts. So if someone suddenly said to you, having two eyebrows makes you a very, very important person, suddenly eyebrows would be important. And everyone who had a unibrow would get obsessed with really getting them to separate themselves, right? But generally speaking, most people have two-ish eyebrows, and so we don't really talk about it. Yeah. But suddenly it would become important, right? If we put a spotlight on it. So the way to understand this in tandem with like social justice issues is to realize that for any number of reasons, certain characteristics have been spotlighted as meaning this or meaning that, possibly falsely, possibly in ways that are really harmful. And so despite the fact that it's all an illusion, the suffering is real, right? So we still do need to understand the impact of people highlighting certain human characteristics and saying they're better or worse, even if we don't believe the whole scenario. Do you know what I mean? Like sexism, like racism, like homophobia, like all of these things. These are just tropes of our ignorance. And yet, the symptoms of them are very, very felt. So when we're starting to unpack our own identity and our own over-identification, it's very important that we then don't make false equivalencies with how now the world is and pretend that labels don't exist, right? Labels exist. They just don't exist from their own side. Yeah. So it's a delicate dance, this relative truth, ultimate truth kind of understanding of how to progress on the spiritual path. Because relative truth is by nature deceptive, not because the truth is deceptive, but because the mind observing it has a quality that creates distortion. We have like a misapprehension of self, of phenomena, of everything. So the only time you actually realize ultimate truth and see it is when you're in meditative equipoise on emptiness after you've realized it directly. And it's only a Buddha that sees relative truth and ultimate truth simultaneously. So what we're trying to do is to not buy into the illusion, even as the illusion still appears. And the easy analogy for this is the way in which we don't buy into the appearance of our face in the mirror. When we see our reflection in the mirror, it does look like there's a whole other face there, but we don't believe it for a second. We don't think our face is suddenly duplicated and then like gone over there, right? We're like human beings, yes? But the cat might think there's a whole other cat there and start like clawing at the mirror, right? So they bought into appearances. So for the human and the cat, the reflection does look like another being. But for the human, they don't believe that appearance to be a whole other being. They know it's just a reflection of their own face. The cat does not. So that's what we're trying to do at our level, is not pretend the appearance isn't there, but to challenge what the appearance means, to not fall into the deceptive quality of things. It seems like that person is bad from their own side, in and of themselves, divorced from context, divorced from history, yeah, unchanging, all sorts of things. And everything is a much bigger picture than that. Yeah, so we don't want to fall into the trap of being like the animal who thinks their reflection is a whole other animal and then gets upset or scared as the result of a lie they've told themselves. It's not the mirror's fault that they believed it, right? So we really need to try and break the spell for ourselves, knowing that appearances will still arise the same way they always did. We have plenty of experience of this already in our life. When we understand deeply someone's story, yeah, there can be someone that you really dislike, and then you find out their backstory and you suddenly forgive them for their problematic behavior in such a way that you have a lot more space for creative solutions to manage those problematic behaviors. Their problematic behaviors don't necessarily change, but because their history has been understood by you, you soften, and they are no longer a condition for your rage. Right? You know, this when you've heard someone's story and now you get them, and they still might be rude in this way or problematic in that way, but it doesn't hook you the same way because you get why. A meditation on dependent arising is starting to understand the why without needing to get to the bottom of the story, because you actually never will. So you get a few steps into, oh, okay, context, causes and conditions, parts, minds labeling. Yep, all of these came together, and I wound up labeling this. It came from this side, not from that side. Does it make some sense? Do you have thoughts or questions so far? Yeah, T, go ahead.
Ah, this is really good. When you first started talking, Venerable, my brain kind of went psst for a second there. I had to pull it back in a little bit, but but then I feel like I started to catch on a little bit. So if it's okay, I just like to share what I feel like I'm grasping a little bit, and
Yeah,
then you can
please.
maybe
Yeah,
help me out.
absolutely.
Um, so what came up for me is like the ability to not see things as fixed
Yeah.
and not overly identifying or attaching to labels or compliments, whether they're great or horrible, is
Mm,
being able to see things more as is and
yeah.
not as good or bad or anything. It's just you are as I am,
Mm,
period. And also it's being doing that practice allows us to stay in a more balanced state and
mm,
have equanimity
hmm.
and also keep that wider awareness, which will
Yeah.
help me more consistently practice that correct viewpoint. And that's kind of what I've got so far from what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, that's really going in the right direction. Absolutely. And, the teachings that we meet first in Buddhism, or maybe come to us more easily in Buddhism, like impermanence and like equanimity, quickly you start to see the way they point you to emptiness. They're not teachings on emptiness, but they point you in that direction because they're asking you to consider that there is more to the story. So, if we can even just use those as segues, like, okay, everything changes. What do I do with that information? Yeah, what do I do with that information? You think, oh, well, when things are good, if I realize they change, I don't grasp. When things are bad, I don't freak out because I know it will change. Oh, oh, and then you start getting this kind of flexibility that goes, then what's arising in this moment could be viewed in any number of ways. Oh, there is more possibility. Oh, there is more flexibility. Oh, merely labeled by the mind. Oh, and you can start to widen it out that way. But it just starts with go with the flow, right? Which dear old dad might have told you when you were a little kid, go with the flow. But then that same go with the flow, easy teaching starts to get more and more layers of depth to it and is able to interrupt more and more ways of problematic thinking habits that we have. So all of this works together. All of this works together. Yeah. Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Yep. Okay. So my question is, the four tenets, what would you advise in terms of reading?
Hmm.
I've looked at, what's available on the presenting the path that we've got, and the material on that is somewhat limited. It doesn't really address the specific. Yeah. You get
Yeah,
my
there's a few really good ones. There's that, the Foundation of Buddhist Thought series by Geshe Tashi Sering. That series has one called Relative Truth and Ultimate Truth and one called Emptiness, and they can kind of get you around some of the basic tenets. Um, there's also a bit more of a sort of, how to say, a little bit dense, but very precise, in Thupten Jinpa's series on the Library of Indian Classics. So that one really goes into amazing depth. Let me see if I can pull it out for you. Thupten Jinpa, there we go. Oh, wait, no. First, it wants me to tell you about searching for the self from His Holiness and Venerable Tifton Children. Searching for the Self is in that Library of Wisdom and Compassion series, and that one goes into the tenant schools probably in enough depth to get some really good work done. This one, so searching for the self that really will give you at least a pithy snapshot of the main
yeah,
tenant schools. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's a good
Okay.
one. So Geshe-Tashi Saringer, that one. And then if you're really feeling ambitious, go for the Tupten Jinpa series. Yeah.
Can you go back to the one by Tashi, Foundation
Yeah.
of Buddhist Thought, for me, please?
Sure.
I need to get his name.
Oh, yes, Geshe-Tashi Sering. And yeah, Heather, go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, unmute, please.
It feels easier to do with the cup or the desk or myself or Venerable Yönten with things than
Mm,
with actions.
yeah,
So that's where because I do feel like I have some capacity to understand what's behind actions,
yeah,
but it feels like it can tip into excusing actions, and I don't know how do we evaluate precept vows and ethics if those are also empty, and
yeah.
if you can help with that.
Yeah, that really, at the end of the day, that becomes the main question, right? Is how do you hold emptiness without negating ethics? And that is the razor's edge we want to understand. There's a famous quote from Lama Chupa, Guru Puja, verse 108, and it says, Samsara and nirvana lack even an atom of inherent existence. Cause and effect and dependent arising are infallible.
Right.
Please bless me to discern the import of Nagarjuna's thought that these two are complementary and not contradictory.
Yeah.
So if you get into negating ethics, you've obviously gone too far. But if you think ethics exist from their own side, divorced from context, you've gone too far.
Right.
So you could take something simple like giving food to the hungry is good. We could say that that is true. Yes, giving food to the hungry, that's good. You don't have to overthink it, or do you? Right? So giving food to the hungry is good in the abstract, just like I am Yönten from a distance.
Right.
But as soon as you go a little bit closer into a specific situation, then you go, is it good from its own side? In and of itself is the action of giving food to the hungry good. What if the hungry person was just about to become empowered enough to get a job? What if the food you give them is something that they're allergic to? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? And then suddenly you realize, well, giving food to the hungry is not good in and of itself, divorced from context. They have to be hungry. The food has to be ethically obtained and healthy for them. They need to be bereft, et cetera, all these pieces. And then we can say, yeah, good, do it. And the danger is that knowing that everything exists contextually like this can make us feel paralyzed and we
Right.
don't act. Yeah, because we can't know the whole story of is it good or is it bad. And
Right.
that's, I think, one of the reasons why the Buddha offered very clear, concise, definable things that we know to be harmful, like don't kill each other, right? Number one. Yeah, don't take things that haven't been freely offered. Don't lie. Just very basic, straightforward do's and don'ts for us to
Right.
start with for
Right.
prajna vows, vows of individual liberation. And then
Right.
when you become more grounded and sophisticated, you have those same vows, but you're able to add nuance. Like, it's still true, you shouldn't lie. And also, if the hunter comes who's chasing the deer and says, which way does the deer go? You can lie to him and say, oh, that way, because you don't want the deer to die and you don't want the hunter
Yeah.
killing karma. So you
Yeah.
know that generally lying is bad, but in this context, for a greater purpose, you're going to.
Right.
Beginning, if you were to teach that to a child, it would just confuse them.
Yeah.
So it's like ethics hold, and you're building your ability to hold more and more nuance and more context so that you don't land in that concrete place, which just invites afflicted behavior.
Well, and it also seems like it can invite an abdication of responsibility for myself and holding other people accountable for their behavior too. And
Ab-
that perhaps this awful person and two or three of the same ones always pop up when I think of that.
yeah.
That you can understand all sorts of context about them and all sorts of, and at the same time, does it matter in a conventional sense if what they've done is harmful? So I feel like it can just be, I just need the appropriate level of navel gazing that I can continue to, act in the world.
Well, it's more
And it's
like
not, obviously it's not navel gazing, but you know what I'm,
no, I do, and I think it's really important because we want to practice this in our everyday life, right? That's the whole point. And then we get into these tangles, and I think we have to keep remembering what is the point of the teaching? Like, what is the goal of it? The goal is to cut suffering and the causes of suffering. So what your main goal with this analysis is to not be hooked into your own afflictions so that you create more negative karma, harming yourself and others. Right?
right,
So the goal is simple in a sense. What are the ways of thinking that will stop you from having an afflicted response?
right,
It doesn't mean you don't have any response. It means
right,
it's not an afflicted response.
right.
So it's really getting to that point where you're holding enough context and pieces and spaciousness to be non-reactive as
Yeah,
kind of in a knee-jerk way.
yeah,
And then from that place you go, and I can say from what I know so far as a adult person who has lived and examined life, that behavior harms that population, should
yeah,
stop. What are creative solutions to facilitate that
yeah,
stop?
yeah.
Then you're doing it from a really spacious, creative place that's flexible, as opposed to the concrete place of anger, which says they should stop. I'm going to just hurt them so they don't hurt anyone else, or I'm just going to block them and I'm just going to shut down my heart. And then we just get more agitated and we don't have more solutions.
Right.
or concretizing millions of people into one specific thing
Exactly.
based on my, right. Okay, that's super, super helpful.
Yeah, it's so important to make it relevant and immediate and daily life. And it's exactly the way you view your own stuff at the end of the day when you do your Vajrasattva practice or you do your purification practice, where you are identifying the mistakes, but not identifying with the
Right,
mistakes.
right,
But in identifying them, you're saying, yeah, that is a fault. I shouldn't have been critical to so and so. I shouldn't have been divisive in this context. That's not how I want to live. And
right.
the reason I did it is not my fault. It's countless causes and conditions came together for my mistake, but it did happen here with my voice, so I take responsibility for it, but I'm not bad because of it.
No, right.
Right? But it's that same thing. And then whatever they did, all right, don't do that. That hurts people. But the reason why and the consequence of is far more complicated than just what my, you know, mind that wants shortcuts says.
Sure. So, right, it's the result of infinite causes and conditions, and you still have to pay the parking ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
With
That's
a
very, very helpful.
mind. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we use the simple examples just to kind of get used to the analysis. So then when it's like the humans, it's you've got a little bit more of a strategy. So use the cup because cups aren't hard. Yeah. I love to use the letter A. That's the Lama Zopa Rinpoche suggestion, is to think about the letter A before you knew how to read, right? The way it was just lines on a page. Someone introduced you to those lines meaning A, meaning this sound ah. And you had to be introduced to that again and again and again. And now when we see the letter A, it seems to tell us what it is from its side. It jumps off the page, it jumps off the screen. I'm a letter A. And we forget that we're the one who placed the label there on the basis of those 3 lines so many years ago and repeated it so many times, it now seems the reverse direction. So it's not problematic with letters, but it is problematic with people. So we've decided that this, and this characteristic equals bad or equals unsafe. And there's a survival mechanism in there that doesn't need to be challenged. We don't need to overthink it. You get the pit in your stomach that says stranger danger, listen to that. Don't be weird, right? But there's also the part of you that says, and there is more to the story. And how many times when you've been open and happy and spacious have you had one of those beautiful interactions with strangers because you didn't come at the stranger with all your preconceptions or you let them release for a second, you know? Um, so, we have a million examples in our life of when we've just been in a cruisy mood, how beautiful life is and how beautiful people are. And the thing is that people weren't more or less beautiful that day, but we were bringing something out in them because we're always bringing something out in each other. And they have stuff that they're coming to you with, right? So it's this interdependent thing. And so if we can just keep like identifying, not identifying with, identifying but not identifying with. Okay, that speech problematic. They are not bad for having it. They have a million reasons why, they have a million stories how. Okay, but we can say, please don't talk to me that way. It's mean. Yeah. And then you're not angry when you say it. You're just strategic. Yeah. So when you're doing these analytical processes, if you can have a shortcut way, like the King of Reasons, it can help. And then later, when you study more, you can bring more nuance to that same exact phrase. So the phrase I recommend, it's not the only phrase, but the phrase I recommend is that absolutely everything is empty of inherent existence because it dependently arises. And this King of Reasons proves the middle way between nihilism and absolutism or eternalism. So to say that something is dependent negates the idea that it could exist under its own power, all by itself, independent, right? So it's dependent. That negates the idea that it did it all by itself. The idea that things arise negates the other extreme of nihilism. So things do come about, change does happen. There is movement, flow, interaction, experience. There's not nothingness, things do arise. So we're trying to stay in this middle way between nihilism and eternalism by really using the word dependent arising to point us there. And so if you were to look at the etymology of dependent arising from the Tibetan, then dependent indicates that things exist in dependence on other factors. Those factors could be causes and conditions, parts and whole, dependence on being posited through the process of labeling, and then drel, arising, means that it arises due to its relationship with something else. We can only say that this is a small room because the room next to me is bigger, right? But if the room next to me was smaller, this would be the big room. It's only in relationship to. So and also if the proper causes and conditions, parts, etc. arise, then the phenomena can arise when the coming together happens. And so dependent can mean like meeting, it can mean reliance, and it can mean dependent in the sense of not independent. So everything has these characteristics. And if you think about that in relationship to like situations you're attached to, in terms of people you have aversion towards, in terms of, all sorts of things, just that word dependent can open the door to more creative thinking. So you can even choose just one of these ways of explaining dependence. Things come together, like cause and effect, or that there is reliance, something contingent on something else, or dependent in the sense of not independent. Yeah, so you can think kind of how the first moment of a sprout relies on the previous moment of sprout, and in the moment of the seed's disintegration is the first moment of that. And we can look at this kind of cause and effect relationship. And that can be something that kind of gets you a mental sense of it, or like scales. As one goes up, the other goes down. And so up is dependent on down. This weight is dependent on that weight. These things can help, but we really need to apply it to like the emotional minutia of our life and where we get really hooked into stories. So you use something that's like low stakes and not too hard and not too confronting, and then you gradually are able to apply it to the difficulties in your life. Okay, so let's see, there's a summary of all of this, which is this. Okay. So dependence can be described causal dependence, mutual dependence, or merely labeled dependence. Basically, all impermanent phenomena rely on causes and conditions in order to arise, like a substantial cause of wood and the coactive condition of screws and a carpenter and a saw in the case of a wooden table. Mutual dependency is impermanent and permanent phenomena, rely on parts and context in order to be understood, used, and viewed. So, like small room, large room, or like the aggregates are the parts upon which we label self, right? Merely labeled dependency also refers to impermanent and permanent phenomena, and this relies on a valid basis of designation and the mind's imputation to exist, be held in awareness, to be engaged with, etc. So when you look at these, it can look really technical, but it also can be quite poetic, like in the case of Zen koans. So the classic one, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? That Zen koan, you've heard that one? Or what's the sound of one hand clapping? You can hold these with an awareness of it is empty because it is dependent. And you realize that the koan is pointing you to the same reasoning. It's just a more poetic way. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Then you start looking at the conditions of how does sound happen? Yeah? There is the falling of the tree, there are the sound waves, there is an ear to hear it, there is a brain to process it, there is a person to label it. It dependently arises if that falling tree makes a sound. There is no sound in and of itself. Do you understand? So then start working with it in scenarios you're attached to where you like, I really want this to happen, or I really hope this doesn't happen. And your emotional well-being is tied up in a story. Then it becomes really interesting. Yeah, I'm going to be really happy when I go on holiday and I see my family over Christmas. I'm going to be so happy, and I'm going to be really happy if so-and-so relative is not there. If they are here, it's going to ruin Christmas. That's the story, right? And you're like, oh, I hope they don't come. I hope they don't come. If they come, Christmas is ruined, right? It might be quite true that that person is disruptive. It might be quite true that this and this and this happen. You're not pretending that life is other than you're seeing. You're just seeing it through a wiser filter of nuance. That this very difficult person also may do this and this and this beneficial thing if you were to see it in that light, etc. Yeah, William, go ahead.
Two questions. One is, you noted there is an ultimate self, and does the ultimate self arise dependent upon causes and conditions as well?
Yeah, the ultimate self is the self that lacks inherent existence. So that's a bit squirrely. Buddha potential or your Buddha nature is the fact that your mind, your mental continuum that's existed from beginningless time until now is impermanent, changes moment to moment. The fact of your mind being empty of inherent existence means it can develop into complete enlightenment. So Buddha nature is the emptiness of the mind. And in a way, that's the ultimate self, but the ultimate self is really just the self's lack of inherent existence. So it exists, but not from its own side.
Okay, great.
Was that your question, or were you coming at a different angle?
No, that was the first half, and the second
Yeah.
half is the second half is, would you say that emptiness inherently exists?
Nope. Emptiness is empty.
Emptiness is a dependent arising as well?
Yes.
Okay. That's hard. That's a little hard to grasp, but
Well, it is, and until you start thinking of emptiness as a characteristic or an attribute that things have. So, like the cup has the characteristic of being empty of inherent existence, but there has to be a cup to attribute that emptiness to. Right? So emptiness can only be ascribed to a concept. So emptiness itself lacks inherent existence because it dependently arises in dependence upon parts, thought, etc., 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 etc. So, I mean, one attribute of the cup is that it's porcelain. One attribute is that it's been painted white. One attribute is that it lacks inherent existence. Now, the fact that it lacks inherent existence is somewhat more significant than the fact that it's white, philosophically, but in general, it's just on the list of its characteristics. But to say, there is a white cup, there has to be a cup. To say that there's a cup that's empty of inherent existence, there has to be a cup. To say that it's a porcelain cup, there has to be a cup, so there has to be a basis. And that's then where the next question usually comes up is like, what makes a valid basis? Because then you start to think that a valid basis must be inherently existent. And no, no, not so, right? But it starts to feel that way. So, valid cognition, analyzing the ultimate, is not destroying that valid basis. Worldly convention is not destroying that basis. But those worldly conventions are not conventions of beautiful or ugly. They're much subtler conventions, like solid or liquid, like space or not, right? Like it's a lot more subtle than opinions and preferences. So, when we're starting to analyze these things, I remember I was going too far down the rabbit hole, and my own teacher said to me, "This is cloth. Which one is cloth? This thread or this thread or this thread or this thread?" Then you lose the cloth. But if you say, "Okay, merely labeled by the mind, this is cloth, it's warm, don't overthink it." Right? So it's true that the cloth lacks inherent existence, and that one of the parts of the cloth is this thread, and another is this thread, and another is this thread. And if you try to find the cloth in amongst its threads, you will lose the cloth. That is true. But if you go too far down that rabbit hole, you won't remember to put a coat on when you go outside. Yeah. So still remember to put a coat on when you go outside. It's winter. Yeah. So you're living in that very delicate ability to examine parts, I think, is the easiest way to understand dependence. Causes and conditions can kind of get you into a trap of how many causes, how many conditions, what's the substantial cause? And then you get into the rabbit hole of trying to understand karma, and it's an extremely hidden phenomena. So I would recommend using parts. And as soon as you start analyzing the parts of something, you realize the something is not its parts. And the classic way of doing this is the sevenfold reasoning of the analysis of the chariot. It is sometimes called Chandrakirti's analysis of the chariot. Of course, we don't really have chariots. We could use a car. But, you can say that's a car. It's very easy. But there is no car without the parts of a car. But how many parts must be gone before the car is no longer able to be labeled car? Is it still a car with no wheels? Is it still a car with no engine? At what point does car dissolve? Right? But if there was an inherently existent car, you could take away all the parts and there would still be like a core car there. But there is no car without its parts. but the parts didn't create car. The parts created the basis upon which we label car. And that's the subtle distinction that we're trying to understand with all things. Yeah, Cynthia, go ahead.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teachings. I just have some terminology clarification. So I think you said emptiness lacks inherent existence, but the term, and I learned it somewhere, some advanced class that I probably shouldn't have gone into, but the permanent uncompounded phenomena is not emptiness, but the emptiness of inherent existence. Is that correct understanding? So when they say emptiness, so there's
Emptiness
a thing
is
as
yeah,
permanent,
yeah, there are
uncompounded
permanent
phenomena.
things. There are permanent things. Permanent things are just things that don't change moment to moment. And emptiness is an example of something that is a permanent thing. Although the things that it is attributed to often are impermanent things that change moment to moment. So the cup is impermanent, right? Because it changes moment to moment. And in 100 years, it will be dust. It's changing. But the fact of it being empty does not change. Yeah,
So
so it's permanent.
emptiness is both, emptiness lacks inherent existence, and also it is permanent uncompounded phenomena. Is that correct to say?
You can say that. Yeah, if it's gonna help you not be angry.
Just for, no, just just for my
Try to
analysis in
understand.
terms of
Absolutely.
terminology. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you so
absolutely.
much.
Yeah, it's yeah, the side point of all of that is to say when we say permanent in Buddhism, we don't mean eternal, right? Permanent does not mean eternal. Permanent just means not undergoing momentary change. So, this cup's emptiness is permanent, but if the cup is destroyed, there's no more emptiness of the cup either, right? Okay. Subtle point may or may not be relevant, but yeah, it's good to bring up. Yeah, Don, go ahead.
Thank you for your teaching, Venerable. When in this Heart Sutra, as it says consciousness, and we're in contemplating the emptiness of consciousness as referred to as in the aggregate, is that synonymous with mental continuum?
Generally, yeah. Generally, yeah.
So then the mental continuum or the consciousness is empty because it's imprinted with delusions. So is that how, like, um because this consciousness in this person right here
Mhm.
is deluded with, I mean, it has delusions, so I'm not awakened in the sense of it's not as clear in clarity and clean like that, right? So is that how the consciousness, what it's referring to is the consciousness is like in this person here, that if it's empty because it's changing. My anger, my patience, my love, my all the things are changing, like the imprints of the consciousness, or
Yeah, kind of. It's going in that direction. It's empty because it depends on the previous moment of mind. So in a way, it's simpler, right? The mind
okay.
is empty of inherent existence because the mind dependently arises. What does the mind dependently arise upon? The substantial cause is the previous moment of mind. The conditions are the circumstances of your karmic habits, the things around you, the various stimuli, et cetera, et cetera. But the mind being beginningless, one of the proofs for the mind being beginningless is that everything must have a substantial cause of a similar type. So the mind would have had a substantial cause of a similar type its previous moment. And so when we talk about the continuity of consciousness, it can start to feel like something that is like a permanent core thread. But the continuum of consciousness it's more like a river. And it changes names as it goes through different countries or goes past this border. Suddenly it has this name, but it's the same continuity of river. And then water is always perfect, clean, clear. Your consciousness is always perfect, clean, clear. The problem is that you've also had the debris of the ignorance and the habits of ignorance. But just like debris, like, leaves and dirt, they can be removed and the water remains. So what we're trying to do is clean out the water and then at the same time bring it to the ocean being enlightenment, right? So if you can really think that your afflictions can be removed and you still remain merely labeled by the mind. It's not like the fact of your emptiness is something to be worried about or chased or, have any particular scary feelings about. The fact that your mind is empty of inherent existence is really, really good news because it means that you can develop that same mind into enlightenment. If it were inherently existent, it would also be just as it is now. You could never change. You could never break any bad habits. You could never develop any new skills. And that's not the case because you already have, just in this life, broken bad habits and developed new skills. So the fact of it lacking inherence is just a characteristic of the mind. Is that coming clear, or do you want to ask a follow-up?
I guess I was, well, the fact that so the mental factors are separate from what is being referred to as the consciousness as well.
No, the mental factors are also consciousness. It's just different
Okay.
characteristics of consciousness, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Different characteristics. So I don't know. We'll shift from water to sky, right? Shift from water to sky. So imagine the mind is like the sky, and the mental factors are like the weather. Weather is just an aspect of sky, right? And sometimes it's, beautiful weather, and sometimes it's scary weather, but it's just weather. Mental factors are just like weather. Yeah, and it's just a characteristic of sky. Another characteristic of sky is that it's spacious and clear and can accommodate all sorts of movement and things within it. And it, is reflective and spacious and vast. That's also something we could equate to the mind. So studying minds and mental factors can be really helpful actually in understanding the way dependent arising creates experience and where the way experience can kind of shine a highlight on this or that aspect of your identity, et cetera, et cetera. So it is really interesting to study minds and mental factors if you have the bandwidth for it. It's a good one. But yeah, consciousness, think of consciousness as like the umbrella category. And then there are like characteristics of consciousness, like main mind, primary consciousness, and mental factors, states of mind. They're just characteristics of that bigger category.
And then like the subtle, more subtle states, like is there the gross subtle, very subtle in consciousness? Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
so?
Yeah, coarse, subtle, and extremely subtle. So it's the
Okay.
extremely subtle consciousness that goes from life to life.
Okay, that's where I was wanting to see if I was finding a flaw, like wondering if the consciousness mentioned here in the Heart Sutra was the same mention as an indestructible drop.
Yep. 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 So that consciousness is referring to primary mental consciousness. And then compositional factors is referring to all of the aggregates except feeling and discrimination.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
just body, so that makes it easy. Yeah. Yeah. So I
I'll
think
keep going. I'll keep trying.
yeah, yeah, and you're probably getting into a classic Tibetan Buddhist conundrum, which is how to marry up the sutra tradition with the tantra tradition. So
Yeah.
the sutra explanation of mind and the tantra explanation of mind go together beautifully, but they're not exactly the same terminology. So marrying them up sometimes can be a bit clunky. And in a lot of ways, the tantric terminology is a lot easier. It's just there's the coarse mind, the subtle mind, and the extremely subtle mind. It's very straightforward. The sutra tradition is like, well, there's the main mind, there are six of
Yeah.
those, there's the mental factors, there's the main
Yeah.
51 of those, it's like
Yeah.
we love a list. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
I've asked this question before, and I've made some improvement, but I'm wondering if you can talk to those of us who feel disconcerted by contemplating that things are not what we've always assumed they're like, right? because a fear factor comes in. Mine's dampened down a bit, but it's still there. So I'm just wondering what you would advise in terms of addressing that.
Yeah, it comes into, do you need good cop or bad cop? And I think if you are feeling fear, be good cop, but be cop, right? Like investigate, investigate. Yeah, like not in a scary sort of like inner city cop way, but like, as if they were ethical and abided by the rules, et cetera, kind of way. So investigate, right? Investigate. And really think like, who is afraid? Where is fear? And sometimes looking for the location can make it sort of get squirrely, right? So it'll feel like you or fear or you are fear live right here at your heart chakra. And then you realize that's actually just tension. Yeah. And then it'll be like, oh, okay, well, I'll be here then and I'll give you a migraine. Or I'll be here now in the pit of your stomach. And those are just areas of tension and constriction. So what if I kind of play with where is fear? Yeah, and who is in control of that? And just kind of like not need an answer, but kind of hold open that curious question of who though, where though, how though. Yeah, because it often will the changeability itself will help free you up. And it will stop feeling concrete in a bad way or too spacious and overwhelming in a bad way. It'll just kind of like lose gas. So they say that when fear comes up, it can be a really good sign, but also that your ego might become quite clever in trying to make things concrete again, right? So it will distract you with your greatest hits of love stories, or your greatest hits of wrongs, or your greatest hits of entertaining moments, or whatever your favorite soundtrack is, will suddenly capture your attention. So sometimes when you're really on a roll with your practice, you get weird obstacles like fear or distraction of tantalizing types or annoying types. You'll fixate on a story of some relationship in your life that's really not that big a deal, but suddenly now you're really annoyed with your landlord randomly. They were a little annoying the whole time, but now they're a really big deal suddenly because your ego's under threat and wants to distract you from destroying it. So that's fun. That's fun. So that fear can be quite useful and playful and, yeah, intriguing.
Many thanks.
Yeah. So I thought what we would do, because for some of you, this is a long conversation that you've had many, many times about emptiness, and for some of you, it's newer. I thought I would use a couple of really pithy quotes as just a reflective exercise for us to sit with rather than a full-fledged meditation. But I have lots of meditations on emptiness on my YouTube channel if you ever want them. So just invite you to read these quotes with me and then just sit with the impact. And in particular, the impact on your sense of self. So as soon as I said meditate, then the cat came. Okay, so just take a minute and get yourself into a comfortable posture, and we'll do a little bit of analysis. Okay, so the first one from Thich Nhat Hanh: form is the wave and emptiness is the water. You can understand through that image. The Indians speak in a language that can scare us, but we have to understand their way of expression in order to fully understand them. In the West, when we draw a circle, we consider it to be a zero, nothingness. But in India, a circle means totality, wholeness. The meaning is the opposite. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form, is like wave is water, water is wave. Because one exists, everything exists. Just sitting with the impact of that on your mind. And then from Sokni Rinpoche, when Buddhists talk about emptiness as the basis of our being, we don't mean that who or what we are is nothing, a zero, a point of view that can give way to a kind of cynicism. The actual teachings on emptiness imply an infinitely open space that allows for anything to appear, change, disappear, and reappear. The basic meaning of emptiness is openness or potential. At the basic level of our being, we are empty of definable characteristics. From Geshe Tashi Tsering, the most fundamental mode of existence of all phenomena in the universe is that they are absent of the intrinsic reality that our ignorance instinctively ascribes to them. And only the wisdom realizing emptiness has the full ability to counteract that ignorance. Being absent of intrinsic reality seems like an odd characteristic to hang a whole world of suffering on. But the simple fact is, we fail to see this as the cause of it all. Understanding emptiness is not, therefore, a philosopher's plaything, but a vital tool for overcoming suffering. And so we strive to have this ultimate bodhichitta, this mind of enlightenment, the main Mahayana motivation, this mind with two aspirations to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings in the mind of an Arya. And in this way, we begin the path of seeing. And the very next meditation on emptiness, we achieve the path of meditation. And we meditate on emptiness again and again and again. Every time we meditate, afflictive obscurations are removed, and eventually cognitive obscurations are removed, until eventually we achieve the path of no more learning, Buddhahood. So these accumulations of wisdom lead us to the removal of the two obscurations. These two obscurations are these deluded mental states that block the attainment of liberation and enlightenment. The grosser kind, the disturbing thought obscurations or obscurations to liberation, and the subtle obscurations, the imprints left when those are purified, called obscurations to knowledge or obscurations to enlightenment. And so we just sit with the root of all of this suffering, the root of samsara, is viewing this conventional I and holding it to exist inherently. If we simply viewed the conventional I, merely labeled by the mind on the collection of parts, there'd be no issue really. But the problem is that we superimpose a sense of inherent existence onto it and onto everything else. And so that creates this illusion of separateness, this dualistic way of being, a sense of concrete me and you, us and them. And then we feel like we need to build a wall or build a fence or build a moat around ourselves to protect ourselves from invaders. Or we need to cling and hoard, become attached to, grasp all those things that seem to support it. But if we realize the play of interdependence, there would be no need for that. And compassion would arise naturally. And so just really thinking, going forward into the rest of the night and into the next week and so forth, just what are ways in which we can stop the grasping at inherent existence. The appearance will be there. Yeah, the appearance of things being in and of themselves, of them being just as they seem. That will keep happening. But how do we stop buying into it? How do we allow ourselves to understand the spectrum of things, the larger story of things, the nuance of things? This is really the question. And so if you can just kind of think of a couple of very fixed or concrete stories you have in your life that give rise to some afflictions, some story you have about another person or yourself or a situation. And every time you think about it, there's this concreteness and really this invitation to agitation. If you can really start to work on seeing the emptiness of the person, the situation, or whatever, through really analyzing the way it dependently arises, it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be that structured. Just think, what made this come about? And see how the details lead to more details, lead to more details, lead to more details, and there is no end to the beginning of something. Yeah, and then you start to let go on where is the place of blame. Yeah, you can still say the responsibility might live here, but the blame actually has nowhere to live. Yeah. Any questions before we call it a night? It's a lot to process. And some of you have been processing it a long time, so you're along for the ride. But yeah, gently. Samantha, go ahead.
I have a question, Venerable, because this is our last class with you. And so if we are taking the class for credit, will the exam be based on the slides? Will it be multiple choice, long answer, or more interview style?
I think probably multiple choice.
Okay.
Probably multiple choice. Yeah, and based on 3 principal aspects of the path, the text and these slides. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I'll get in touch with Dundrup about the logistics of that. Yeah. Absolutely. This particular course of Discovering Buddhism sometimes emphasizes the lamrim and the 3 scopes more than specifically these 3 principal aspects of the path, though they're mentioned. And I just felt like it was important to highlight these because they're kind of more invitations for direct, specific practice. Yeah. Yeah, William, sorry, go ahead.
I was just wondering if the retreat next Saturday is going to be recorded as well. I have to miss like an hour or so of it.
Yeah, I think it probably will be, but what do you think? Who's in charge?
I believe so. I believe
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Great, great. Yeah, and if not, I've got many variations of the meditations that you can get free online, if you ever want to. So I can also send a recommended playlist or something to Venerable Dundrup. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and dedicate. Jantu Sancho Rinpoche Amage Panam Ke Gyochi Ke Panyam Pa Me Payan Gone Gondu Pelwan Sho Tony Dawa Rinpoche Make Panam Ke Gyochi Ke Panyam Pa Me Payan Gone Gondu Pelwan Sho. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll send along the slides for them to be forwarded to you if you're interested, and happy practicing.
I didn't know this was our last class. I'm
Yeah.
too attached.
I'm sure we'll do something again someday, don't you worry.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you, Venerable. Please come back and teach us more.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.